Today I'm doing an updated review for the Vevor faceting machine. I've done an unboxing and an initial review. After about 6 months of practice and learning with it, I can say it does work for learning. It does put out some decent stones. Quick little recap. You do need to get a few things. It doesn't work right out the box. I would start with the transfer jig and also getting the sintered diamond lapidary disc 600 through 3K and some copper laps. I got 4 of them myself and practiced both scoring and not scoring. Right now I prefer not scoring, and I get a diamond paste pack with 8K and 16K for the copper discs. Next up, faceting diagrams. Now, I made my own for the emerald cut because I couldn't find any that would work. However, you can find free faceting diagrams by Googling for them. You want to stick with ones that only have 2 levels of angles on each side. Okay, so now we're to the first 2 struggles with this machine. Cutting the girdle is difficult. I have to use the angle manipulator. Second off, my mast is not perfectly straight up and down, and I can't figure out which part of it needs to get filed down. I'm afraid to mess it up. There are ways to still get it to work. I will notice there is an area where the stone is not being ground. As I move it over, it will start grinding away. I will get it so that it starts grinding again, always at the same spot on the wheel. You'll kind of see that as we go on. So here I'm going to cut the rest of the girdle following the diagram that I'm pretty much making up for this stone. After the girdle, we move on to cutting the pavilion. To raise the angle manipulator, we have to have this height adjuster, which attaches to the mast, and you can make small adjustments by twisting. Just a small example of this. Then we want to move the mast closer to the flat lap disc. Thankfully, this little bolt can be loosened, then you just adjust and tighten the bolt back down. Angle manipulator is set up in a way where you can get 2 settings that are locked in place. One will be flat against the block, and then the other is pushed up by the screw. The bolt has a nut that is supposed to stop it so you can get a second setting. However, when you're inserting the bolt, it will just screw through the block and the nut at the same time. So you kind of need some spacers so it's locked into place. This gives you 2 precise spots where it will stop. And now you can start faceting the pavilion. So if you listen, you will hear how it starts grinding when the stone passes over a certain spot. That's how I judge where I am in my cutting. I'll pick a spot on the lap disc and go from there. Try to get it as consistent as possible. This is my one big critique, as well as there's just a little bit of play in the manipulator arm. You can still get decent cuts out of this machine. Here you can see me using the height adjustment function to get the mast to be exactly where I want it. First I lock in that bottom part, and then I twist the top part of the mechanism and lock it into place where I want it. Then by picking that spot on the flat lap, I know I've got as close as I can get to precision. While I have a minute, I'll talk about the lap discs that you have to get separately. Now, I only really use two when it comes to the faceting itself, and that's the 600 and the 3000 grit diamond sintered plates, and then the copper ones for polishing. So after I've used the 3000 grit, I will switch over to a copper lap and go to polishing. My first will be the 8000 grit. I'm using an unscored copper lap. And in my first polish or pre-polish, 8K diamond paste. And then I just do the same process over with these two copper plates. This leaves me with my pavilion cut. From here you use a transfer jig and you transfer it so that it's upside down and you start cutting the crown. And this is pretty much the reverse of what you did to the pavilion. There's not a whole lot of difference actually. The last thing you'll need to cut and polish is the table, and since that's the flat top, you'll want this 90-degree angle collet that comes with the machine. Getting this lined up perfectly flat is time consuming, but it's worth making sure you do it right. Once you're sure that you've cut your nice flat table, the next step is to polish that. In the last 6 months that I've had this faceting machine from Vevor, I've done a bit of practice. I've cut maybe 20 stones. I've played with it and tried to work it out. This is my first faceting ever, besides a really bad homemade one I gave a shot at. I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with the results. Sure, I'm not gonna cut no $10,000 sapphires. I just wouldn't do it on this machine, but I can learn. It's great for a hobbyist, and it's great for learning. I hope y'all enjoyed and hopefully learned something from this review if you're considering the machine. If you got any questions or comments, please leave them down below, and have a wonderful week.